Hi there. Today I want to talk about organic food. So the claim that I want to make is that if you have the choice between buying organic food or non-organic food, there's no evidence that organic food is better or worse than non-organic food. So for the moment, there's no benefit in buying organic food or buying non-organic food. It's about the same. Now, if you also care about doing the most good, then you can claim that because non-organic food is less expensive, then it is better to buy the non-organic food if you have the choice. And then you save money, you spend less on food, and then you can donate this money to the most effective charities. So that's what an effective altruist would do. Now, the reason why I want to talk about organic food today is because a few weeks ago, a new meta-analysis and systematic review appeared in the scientific literature. It is the article published in Environmental Research Letters. It's called Comparative Analysis of Environmental Impacts of Agricultural Production Systems, Agricultural Input Efficiency and Food Choices. And so this is a very interesting article because it compares different agricultural systems, such as organic versus non-organic, or grain-fed beef versus grass-fed beef, or plant-based products versus animal products. And it is a meta-analysis, so it combines a lot of different studies. So it gives a good overview of the scientific evidence. And in the article you can see that it is not clear to say that organic food is better or worse than non-organic food. You can make no conclusion in either way. But it is very clear in this article that plant-based is better than animal-based. So a shift in diet away from animal products toward plant-based products has clear environmental benefits, whereas a shift away from non-organic and towards organic food, or a shift away from grain-fed beef and towards grass-fed beef, does not have clear environmental benefits. So let's look at the studies. There are also other meta-analyses that give the similar results. So in 2009, there was an article published in the British Food Journal called A Meta-Analysis of the Differences in Environmental Impact Between Organic and Environmental Farming. In 2012, there was the article published in Journal of Environmental Management called Does Organic Farming Reduce Environmental Impacts? A Meta-Analysis of European Research. And then there is also in 2012 an article in Nature called Comparing the Yields of Organic and Conventional Agriculture. So we now have basically 4 meta-analyses that compare organic with non-organic food, and all these meta-analyses point in the same direction that I will explain now in more detail. So let's look at general environmental impacts. First of all, it's not possible yet to look at general categories such as biodiversity. We have to look at specific impact categories such as land use, eutrophication, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. For those who are not familiar, eutrophication means an oxygen depletion in the rivers and the seas due to the use of too much manure or fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus compounds runoff in water systems, and eventually the fish die, they suffocate because a process of oxygen depletion happens there. That's one of the phenomena related to eutrophication. So what happens if you compare different farming systems? Well, we can conclude that organic farming compared to non-organic farming if you buy a piece of product, 1 kilogram of organic potatoes versus non-organic potatoes, so if you compare what is relevant for the consumer, 1 kilogram of this product versus 1 kilogram of that product, so looking at the product level, we can say that organic farming requires more land, so it has a higher land use, it has higher eutrophication and therefore a higher environmental impact. It has about equal greenhouse gas emissions and about equal acidification, but lower energy use. So on some criteria, organic is worse, on some it is better, on some it is the same as non-organic. So what can we conclude from this? Well, we can conclude that it's not easy to say whether or not organic is better or worse than non-organic. So that's the most important lesson that we can learn. Now there are studies that say that, for example, the biodiversity on the cropland, the organic farms, is higher than biodiversity on non-organic farms, but this only looks at biodiversity on those farms, on the farm level. But if you realize that organic farming has lower yields and therefore require more land, that means that if we buy more organic, we need more land. That means natural reserves, forests and so on, have to be transformed into agricultural land. And we know that natural habitats and forests and so on have much, much higher biodiversity than the biodiversity on organic farms. So clearing forests and introduce organic farms is not good for biodiversity in general. So on the organic farm, the biodiversity is higher, but in general, it's not clear whether biodiversity on the earth is higher or lower when we turn to organic farming. So that's we have no clear evidence which way it's the best. This is the discussion about land sharing. And versus land sparing. So land sparing means we move to highly intensive, high yielding farming, so with high crop yields. That means we don't need much land. We can spare land, so it can remain natural habitat. And land sharing means we turn natural habitat into agricultural land, and we increase the biodiversity on agricultural land. So we share the biodiversity. It's not clear which one is the best, but there are evidences, for example, organic farming in biodiversity hotspots in the south and tropical rainforests, for example. There, most likely, biodiversity is not a good idea because those natural habitats have a very high biodiversity, and once you turn them into agricultural land, their biodiversity drastically decreases. In other areas, in Europe, for example, it's not clear. Perhaps land sharing might be better. Okay. So on general level, we cannot say whether or not organic is better or worse. Now, what about the use of pesticides? So it is clear that synthetic pesticides are not allowed to be used in organic farming, but still other so-called organic or natural pesticides are allowed in organic farming, and often those organic pesticides are harmful for biodiversity and health. So some examples are copper sulfate, which is very persistent and 10 times more toxic than some synthetic fungicides, according to LD50 toxicity values. If you look at the impact on the bees, for example, in organic agriculture, some pesticides are allowed, such as pyrethrin, azadirachtin, and eucalyptus oil, and these are dangerous for bees. And we know there is a problem with the bees; they are dying. So it's not clear. some pesticides are allowed in organic farming, and some of those pesticides can be more harmful than synthetic or non-organic pesticides. Now, if you look at the land use, so I said that organic requires more land. That is due to two reasons. First, it is due to use of less effective pesticides, which means, or no pesticides, which means that the yields on the farms are lower. That's one of the reasons why organic farming requires more land. And secondly, organic farming requires more animal manure instead of synthetic fertilizers. And of course, those animals, they have to also use land. So animal manure also requires agricultural land. And this is an extra effect why on the whole level, if you look at the system level, organic farming requires more land. Now with the pesticides again, there is no clear evidence that choosing organic pesticides is better than synthetic pesticides. So there is only one study, interesting study about soybeans. It's called "Choosing Organic Pesticides Over Synthetic Pesticides May Not Effectively Mitigate Environmental Risk in Soybeans." And so the conclusion was that those biopesticides, the organic pesticides, were less effective in against aphids, for example. They are as toxic as, or even sometimes more toxic than against aphids, more toxic compared to non-organic pesticides. Also more toxic towards the natural enemies of aphids, so ladybirds, for example. Some of the organic pesticides are more toxic towards insects so the non-target insects, the harmless insects. And they have a higher environmental impact quotient compared to synthetic pesticides. So in that sense, for soybeans at least, it's not clear whether or not choosing organic pesticide is better. And now the question is about the externality of costs, environmental costs. So we can say that non-organic farming requires that water companies purify the water, so the water is polluted due to the pesticides. It is estimated that in the Netherlands, for example, the water companies have to spend about 23 million euros a year for the purification of water due to the agricultural pollution of pesticides. Let's suppose that these are the pesticides all from non-organic farming. That means that non-organic farming has an externality, an environmental cost, that's not included in the price of the non-organic food products that we can buy in the supermarket. And this total externality cost comes up to 23 million euros. Okay, now we know that organic food is more expensive. It's about 30% or 50% more expensive than non-organic food. It depends on the kind of food, of course. So if you look at the Netherlands, suppose if the Netherlands, everyone would buy 100% organic food. So in order to avoid this extra purification cost, the purification of the water, if everyone in Netherlands had to buy organic food, they have to spend about 600 euros a year extra costs because organic food costs more. That's up to about 10 billion euros. And that's about 400 times the cost of water purification. So it is important that environmental harms, environmental costs, should be included in the price. So we have to internalize the environmental costs into the price of the product. That's clear, but the question is how much extra would it cost then? Probably the extra costs, the additional cost of organic foods is about 400 times higher than this externality cost of non-organic foods. So that's not an effective environmental policy either. Now, there's another problem with organic farming. It often uses biological pest controls. Use ladybirds or weevils, in organic farming, genetically modified crops are not allowed to be used there. So organic farming is against GMOs. And one of the reasons is that they fear that the GMOs can have a risk of an uncontrolled spreading or of the genes, the genetically modified genes, into the environment without being able to control this. And there is no clear evidence that this is a real danger for the environment or for human health or whatever. But on the other hand, the organic or biological pest control, there we do already have some examples where there was an uncontrolled spreading of ladybirds or weevils that cause harm to local biodiversity. And so in this sense, farmers who avoid using pesticides and who wanted to use those exotic ladybirds and the exotic weevils, introduce them in the local area, they caused an uncontrolled spreading of those exotic species. So in this sense, why organic farming is against GMOs is irrational, because in organic farming, some organic pest controls were allowed that involve or have a risk for uncontrolled spreading. So the exotic species, introduction of exotic pest control species. So that's one of the reasons why we don't see this evidence of uncontrolled spreading of genetically modified crops in the environment. So there's no reason to be against GMOs. And there's more. Some GMOs are Bt crops. Bt refers to a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, that produces an insecticide, something that is poisonous to insects. And this Bt insecticide is also allowed in organic farming. So here we have the idea that GMOs, Bt crops, these are the GMOs, they are not allowed in organic farming because they are supposed to be so-called unnatural, but the very same insecticide, the Bt insecticide, is allowed to be used in organic farming. So this Bt insecticide, it's a so-called natural insecticide because it's produced by bacteria, but the same natural pesticide, when it's produced by the crops, then it becomes so-called unnatural, although it's the same pesticide. And then these Bt crops are not allowed to be used in organic farming. Now again, here we can look at the meta-analysis. In science, it's called a meta-analysis of effects of Bt cotton and maize on non-target invertebrates. And that says that you can compare three kinds of fields. One where there is spraying of Bt insecticides allowed, so the spraying. This also includes organic farms where spraying of this Bt insecticide is allowed. You can compare it with the GMO crops where the Bt crops grow, and you can compare it with the non-GMO crops where no spraying was done. So it's clear that in the third field, the non-GMO, without spraying, they contain the highest biodiversity of non-target invertebrates. Yeah? So the harmless, the innocent invertebrates. But of course also they had the lowest yields. So when you have to look at global biodiversity and you have lower yields and therefore you require more land, it's not clear what effects on global biodiversity this implies. So we have to compare the first two fields, the field where there is spraying of the Bt pesticide, including the organic farm, and the field where GMOs were used. And there, on the field with the GMOs, we saw a higher biodiversity of non-target invertebrates. So there we have higher biodiversity and also a higher yield. So this second field, the GMO crops, they have both higher yields and higher biodiversity of non-target invertebrates and a lower spraying of this pesticide. So here again, it's irrational why organic farming does not allow some GMOs, even when these GMOs produce less pesticides, can have higher biodiversity of non-target invertebrates, can have higher yields. And there's more. So with the GMOs, organic farmers complain against the non-organic farmers, the neighboring farmers who use GMOs, because they have a risk of cross-pollination, unintended GMO contamination. So in organic farming, GMOs are not allowed. That means that when an organic farmer has a non-organic farmer as a neighbor, and this neighbor uses GMOs, there's a risk of cross-pollination of the GMO seeds. The GMO genes can cross-pollinate towards the organic crops on the organic farmlands. And that makes coexistence of GMOs and organic farming difficult. So organic farmers often complain against non-organic farming. But first of all, there is no clear evidence of a threat of this cross-pollination. So these genes, the genetically modified genes, they are not harmful. They have no health costs. So they have no clear, proven environmental risks. So it's not clear why this cross-pollination is really a harm, or it's really bad. And cross-pollination, it's natural. Also, organic farmers, they often use new breeds, and those new crops that they use, they also have new genes. And with their new crops that the organic farmers use, there's also cross-pollination possible from their new seeds, their new crops to the neighboring farms. So there's no clear reason why cross-pollination of GMO crops is bad, but cross-pollination of other new crops developed by other breeding technologies that are used by organic farming does not pose a similar risk. So on the level of risk from GMOs, with this cross-pollination of genes, no clear evidence of a problem. But on the other hand, non-organic farmers, they could or should sometimes complain against organic farming, because there is a reverse risk. So organic farmers have more difficulties in controlling pests because they do not use synthetic pesticides. More difficulty in controlling pests, so it can happen that there's a pest outbreak of aphids, for example, and then the neighboring farms, so these pests, they migrate to the neighboring farms, and that's a clear harm. So the neighbor, the farmer there, can complain that his or her crops are being attacked by the pests coming from the organic farmer. So again, it's irrational of organic farming to be against GMOs, because with GMOs you have less pesticide use and you can better control pests, and there's no risk, no higher risk of cross-pollination compared to the cross-pollination risks that are already present with organic farming. Now let's look at the fertilizer. So I spoke about pesticides now. One of the reasons why organic farming has lower yields. Now another reason why organic farming requires more land is that they do not use synthetic pesticides. They the claim is synthetic pesticides are based on resources, natural resources that can be depleted, such as fossil fuels. That's true. Although synthetic pesticides could also be made from renewable energy, wind energy, solar energy. These can also and are also used to produce synthetic fertilizers. But also in organic farming, some depletable resources, such as rock phosphates, are allowed. So some mineral fertilizers are allowed as well in organic farming, even if the phosphate rocks are a scarce resource and can be depleted as well. And of course, in organic farming, if you require more animal manure as a fertilizer, but the problem is, of course, those animals, they require more land to eat. So the claim is on organic farming, the soil organic matter is higher than in non-organic farms. That's true, but this soil organic matter comes from the manure, and this manure comes from the animals, and the animals, they eat foods that comes from someplace else, not from the farm itself. So it's not always clearly a closed loop, a closed nutrient cycle. So of course the claim that soil organic matter is higher on organic farming, it's of course true. What you can do, for example, is you can cut down all the forests and take all the biomass of the forest and put all this biomass on the organic farms. Of course, then the organic farms have a lot of biomass in the soil, but it required a lot of natural habitat. And the same goes for when you use animal manure. The animals have to eat food, and often natural habitat is transformed to livestock farming for the animals to eat food. So there, on level of using fertilizers, we can also say that we saw that, for example, there's some evidence that eutrophication is higher when you compare a kilogram of organic food with a kilogram of non-organic food. And why is this the case? Well, with synthetic fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, you can better manage the levels what the crops need. So if the crops need a little bit more nitrogen and a little bit less phosphorus, you can adapt your composition of your fertilizer so that you can apply it with the right amount that the crops themselves need. With animal manure, it's not the case, because the animals, they produce fertilizer and it has a fixed nitrogen and phosphorus level. And so these levels in the animal manure, the nitrogen and phosphorus levels, they are not exactly the levels that the plant requires. So it's not adapted or fitted to what the crops need. And therefore, there's often an over-application in general of fertilizers on organic farming. Now let's look at human health. So I spoke about environment. There are no clear evidence why organic is better or worse. And same goes for human health. We cannot say that organic food is better or worse compared to non-organic food. Again, there are some meta-analyses and systematic reviews such as the nutrition-related health effects of organic foods, a systematic review published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2010, or the article, Are Organic Foods Safer or Healthier Than Conventional Alternatives? A systematic review published in 2012. Or in Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition, the article, Organic Food, Buying More Safety or Just Peace of Mind? A critical review of the literature. So these are reviews of the literature, and the general conclusion is we cannot say whether or not organic is better or worse. On some levels it's better, on some it's worse, and on many levels it's the same. And so in general, I would conclude it's about the same. So for example, looking at nutrient values, you can take the example of organic milk. Then there's a study that says that organic milk has higher omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids and higher levels of iron. But the same study also said that organic milk has lower levels of iodine and selenium. So if you say organic products have higher levels of this, then I can say, well, non-organic farm products have higher levels of that, and okay. Now, what is clearly irrational is that in organic products, enrichment with vitamins is not allowed. Take, for example, soy milk. So in animal cow's milk, there are important vitamins, B12, vitamin D, and so on. But in organic soy milk, it's not allowed to enrich this milk with the very same vitamins. And this makes the non-organic milk healthier. The non-organic milk, soy milk, there's a lot of non-organic soy milk that is enriched with calcium, minerals, and vitamins such as vitamin D and vitamin B12. And so this non-organic enriched soy milk is healthier than the organic soy milk. So again, that's a kind of an irrational policy of organic farming. Besides nutrient values, we can also compare the toxic chemicals, compare it between organic and non-organic food products. Let's look at mycotoxins first. So there's some evidence, small, weak evidence, that organic products have higher levels of mycotoxins. And there's a study, so mycotoxins, they are poisonous, they are from fungi and organic cereal crops. They have more infections with this fungi because the farmers are not allowed to use fungicides. And the sugar content in these organic crops is higher, and that attracts more fungi, and these fungi produce the mycotoxins. Again, this is an irrational policy because you can compare it again with GMOs that are not allowed in organic farming, and there are some studies that say that GMOs have fewer mycotoxins. So there is a study called Mycotoxin Reduction in BT Corn, Potential Economic, Health and Regulatory Impacts. So what happens is with BT corn, it produces an insecticide, which means that it's less vulnerable to insects. And those insects, when they eat from the crops, they often transmit this fungi, and these fungi produce the mycotoxins. So if the insects do no longer eat from the crop, there is less infection with fungi, and that explains why these BT corn can have lower levels of mycotoxin. And that explains why BT corn can be healthier than the organic corn. We can look at other risks, food-related risks. For example, bacteria, dangerous E. coli bacteria. Organic farming uses a lot of animal manure, and this animal manure, it's instead of artificial fertilizers, and this animal manure is also not treated with radiation or non-organic antibacterial means. So the organic manure, animal manure, is often infected with E. coli, and if you apply this to the crops, to the plants, then of course the E. coli can infect, can be on our salads. There are some weak evidences or anecdotes again here that organic meat, for example, has higher levels of dangerous bacteria, because in organic farming antibiotics are more restricted. Organic meat products can have higher levels of the unhealthy trans fats. Organic eggs and organic chicken meat can have higher levels of dioxins compared to non-organic. So, but these are all anecdotes. You can also say that organic have lower levels of toxins on other ways. But let's look now at pesticides again, because that's where the main difference is between organic and non-organic farming. Now, with pesticides, we can say that in organic farming, some pesticides are allowed. Only the synthetic pesticides are not allowed. On the crops, there's a possibility of the remaining residues of pesticides. Now, if you look at fruit, for example, an apple, in the apple, we know in general apples are healthy, but also apples themselves produce pesticides to protect themselves from insects and fungi and things like that. So in the apple are pesticides, and if you look at, so there are a lot of chemicals in the apple, okay? And some of the chemicals in the apple can be cancerous, for example. Now, if you look at the ratio of cancerous and non-cancerous chemicals in the apple, what the apple itself produces, this ratio is about the same as the ratio of cancerous and non-cancerous chemicals in synthetic and natural pesticides applied on the crops. Yeah. So the apple themselves contain pesticides, and what we can say is there is an article published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences with the title Dietary Pesticides, 99.99% all natural. And that means that 99.99% of the pesticides that we eat are not pesticides residues, but are the pesticides that are already inside the crop. Even if you don't apply pesticides on the crops, then we still eat 99.99% of all pesticides, because the crops themselves produce so much pesticides. So here we can ask the question: is this if you make a different, if an organic apple has 99.99 amount of toxic chemicals, and a non-organic apple has 100 amount of toxic chemicals, there's a difference of 0.01%. Does this really matter? And the expectation is no, it doesn't matter that much. The idea is that organic farmers, they are not allowed to use synthetic insecticides and fungicides and so on, and therefore they often use races, crops, apple races that are less vulnerable by nature, by themselves, less vulnerable to insects and fungi. And that means those races that they use, those special breeds of apple, they produce more fungicides and insecticides themselves. So the crops, they also produce themselves fungicides and insecticides. So in that sense, it's not clear whether or not organic apples are healthier than non-organic. Organic apples can contain higher levels of so-called natural insecticides in the apple and less residues on the outside of the apple compared to non-organic apples. But We know that 99.99% of all the insecticides and fungicides that we eat are already in the apple. It doesn't really matter that much. Now there's one study, an interesting study, that tries to estimate the cancer risk related to consumption of fruit and vegetables. So I said that in the apple there are chemicals, and some of them are carcinogens. The article is called Estimation of Cancer Risk and Benefits Associated with Potential Increased Consumption of Fruits and Vegetables, published in Food and Chemical Toxicology. And according to the study, it says that the risk of cancer due to the applied pesticides, so the pesticide residues, on the vegetables and fruits, increases your cancer risk with about 1 in 50 million per year. Yeah. So that's your increased cancer risk when you eat those pesticide residues. Now you can compare it with in the apple there are a lot of chemicals that protect against cancer. That's why fruit and vegetables are healthy and are protective against cancer, because those protective substances of the fruit and vegetables, they decrease your risk of cancer with 2,000 in 50 million per year. Yeah. So the protective effect of eating fruits and vegetables is 2,000 times stronger than the cancer risk of the pesticide residues applied to the crops. So that's why, in general, fruits and vegetables are healthy and very important to protect against cancer. On the other hand, you can compare it again with animal products. World Health Organization declares that red meat is probably carcinogenic and processed meat is carcinogenic. So there's clear evidence that meat does not really protect against cancer. Now, what about the general risk of dying from pesticide residues on the non-organic food crops? So let's say I spoke about cancer risk, 1 in 50 million per year. Let's suppose that, use this as an estimate, we can estimate that about the death rate, the death risk of using non-organic products will be about 1 in a million per year. Yeah. So 1 in a million people will die every year when they eat non-organic food. Yeah. This is a rough estimate. If we suppose, of course, that if you get cancer, you die from cancer, and cancer is the most important cause of death. And okay, so let's use this as an estimate. It's called a micromort, so a risk of 1 in a million. It's called a micromort, when you increase your risk of dying with 1 in a million. Now, to compare, in a lot of countries or environments, cities or so, riding a bike 20 kilometers also has a micromort risk, so a risk of an accident, a deadly accident of 1 in a million. Now we can ask people, so if you drive 20 kilometers by bike, how much money are you willing to spend to eliminate this increased risk of dying? Yeah. So instead of 1 in a million, we eliminate the risk towards 0 in a million. Yeah. How much money are you willing to spend? Are you willing to spend 600 euros to eliminate this risk of driving 20 kilometers by bike? And most people I know are not willing to spend that much money to eliminate, to make driving 20 kilometers by bike completely safe. Yeah. So imagine every time you drive 20 kilometers, you have to pay 600 euros. That's to eliminate the risk of dying. That's too much. Now, where does this 600 euros come from? Well, I said that organic food has an additional cost. It's about 30 or 50% higher cost. So if you eat non-organic foods, you have, as an estimate, 1 in a million chance a year of dying from the pesticides. You can eliminate this risk if you buy 100% organic food. Buying 100% organic food means that you have to pay 600 euros a year more. Every year your expenditures for food increases with 600 euros. So this year you spend 600 euros extra to buy organic food in order to eliminate this risk of dying from pesticides. Now you are not willing to buy 600 euros in order to eliminate the risk of dying by an accident when driving a bike. It is irrational to buy 600 euros extra to eliminate the risk of getting cancer. So here again, probably we can say that if you want to decrease your risk of cancer, buying organic foods, if you want to decrease your mortality risk, buying organic food is probably too expensive. You are willing to pay a bit money to decrease your mortality risk. That's fine, of course, but probably not so much as the additional costs involved with buying organic food. So if you ask people how much they are willing to spend for safety measures, public health, road safety, traffic safety, to decrease 1 micromort of risk, so to decrease the risk of dying with 1 million, and then people have answers like they are willing to spend about 50 euros extra. So at most 50 euros, but this is 10 times less than the additional cost of organic food. So buying organic food is not an effective way to decrease, it's not a cost-effective way to decrease your risk of dying. It's probably 10 times more expensive than what you are willing to pay to decrease your risk of dying. And also you can look at studies about the value of a statistical life. So how much money are we as a society willing to spend to save a life? In general, it's about 10 million euros per life saved or per avoided death. That's how much our society or the government, the hospitals and so on, are willing to spend to save a life. Now, again, if you look at the additional cost of organic foods, that is about 60 times higher than this value of a statistical life. So if you buy 100% organic food, you have to pay 600 euros a year. If we do that as a whole society, the whole society will pay hundreds of millions of euros extra per year. And we as a society are not willing to pay so much money extra in order to avoid a death in the hospitals, on the roads, for example. So here again, we see a disproportion. Another example that I can say about this additional cost is if you are not only concerned about your own health, but general human health. Let's look at an average Belgian person buys about 1% of its food organic. That means each year there's an average Belgian person pays 6 euros of additional costs to buy this organic food. So an average person in Belgium pays 6 euros extra. Now, over the whole lifetime of a person, a Belgian person pays about 500 euros. So an average Belgian person pays 500 euros additional costs for buying organic food. Now, suppose that suppose that instead of buying 1% organic food, a Belgian person buys 0% organic food. So a current average Belgian person buys 1%. Suppose that person buys 0%. Then that person can save 500 euros over the course of his life, 500 euros. Now, what can we do with 500 euros? If you look at the most cost-effective charities, health charities, such as the Against Malaria Foundation, that saves lives by distributing bed nets, prevent people from dying from malaria. This organization, when you donate 500 euros to this organization, that organization can save by 5 or 10 healthy life years, quality adjusted life years. So here's a comparison. If you buy 1% organic food instead of 0% organic food, you spend 500 euros extra to food. Okay, and in Africa, for example, 5 or 10 healthy life years will be lost. Yeah. The other option is if you buy 0% organic food instead of 1%, and you save 500 euros, and you donate those 500 euros to Against Malaria Foundation, someone else in Africa will have 5 or 10 extra healthy life years. So that's the issue here. Now it is very unlikely that if you buy 0% instead of 1% organic food, that your life expectancy will decrease by 5 years. Yeah. So the difference between buying 1% of food organic versus 0%, most likely it will not come up to a difference of 5 healthy life years. Yeah. So that again means that when it comes to improving healthy life years, buying organic food is not cost effective. And that's why I decided, when I have the choice between an organic and a non-organic food product, I buy the non-organic food product, the less expensive food product. I save a lot of money. I calculated it. It's about 100 euros per month that I save now, compared to when I bought more organic food. 100 euros per month. So I donate this to the most cost-effective charities. 100 euros, it's about saving 1 healthy life year. So each month I can save 1 healthy life year of a human somewhere else, in Africa, for example. So that's the good I can do by buying non-organic food. Most likely when buying non-organic food, of course, more pesticides will be used, but it's unlikely that over the course of a year, someone else we here, the farmers or I, lose 12 healthy life years every year. That's very unlikely. So that's why buying non-organic food and donating the saved money to effective charities is very cost effective, is good for human health. Now to finish, I said that there's no clear evidence, according to the study that I started with, this recently published study, there's no clear evidence that organic food is better in terms of the environment or in terms of human health compared to non-organic food. Now, there's something else that we can choose, and that's different, choosing plant-based products instead of animal-based products. Now, in that case, there is clear evidence, very clear evidence, that eating less meat, eating less animal products, and increasing your consumption of healthy fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, has both environmental and health benefits. And when it comes to environmental benefits, I said that with buying organic food, there's a trade-off. So you decrease synthetic pesticide use and you decrease energy use, but you increase land use and you increase eutrophication. Yeah, so there's a trade-off between land use and pesticide use. We don't know what the effect on biodiversity is, but if we buy vegan products, if we eat more vegan or plant-based, then it's a decrease in land use, it's a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, it's a decrease in eutrophication, it's a decrease in pesticide use, it's a decrease in water use, it's a decrease in energy use, it's a decrease in every environmental impact. And most of all, if you combine them, it's a decrease in biodiversity impact. Yeah? So the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization say that livestock farming is most likely the most important threat to global biodiversity. So here we have kind of the elephant in the room. Instead of buying organic food, we should buy more plant-based food, vegan food. That's a very good win-win-win-win situation for the environment. It's a win for all the important environmental indicators. So if you look at the most important environmental indicators, we speak about land use or deforestation, we speak about carbon, greenhouse gas emissions, we speak about eutrophication. These are three very important environmental impacts. If you look at the environmental literature. And so buying organic food is not good for land use, it's not good for eutrophication, but buying vegan food, it is good for land use, it is good for greenhouse gas emissions, and it is good for eutrophication. So there's a win-win. And yeah, you can see this, for example, in a study in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. It's called Analysis and Valuation of the Health and Climate Change Co-Benefits of Dietary Change. So this looks at the climate change benefits. But that's an interesting study because it also looks at the health benefits. And in that study, it's a kind of simulation in 2050. Suppose in 2050 we eat, there are different scenarios, a reference scenario where we eat animal products, and a vegan scenario where everyone eats vegan. Take 1,000 people. In the reference scenario, about 10 of them will die, so 1% death rate per year. Yeah? 10 of those people will die. In the vegan scenario, 9 people will die. So that means 1 person will not die that year. That basically means that 1 out of 10 causes of death will be due to the non-vegan diet, or due to the diets too low in fruits and vegetables and too high in meat, especially red and processed meat. So 1 in 10 cause of death. And you can also say this 10% mortality risk or 10% high risk of chronic diseases and so on. That's also reflected in other big studies, prospective cohort studies, health studies, and systematic reviews. So there's a famous study, Vegetarian Dietary Patterns and Mortality in Adventist Health Study, in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And that's a very big prospective cohort study following tens of thousands of people, looking at their diets and how they die and so on. And there again you see a 10 or 15% decrease of risk of losing healthy life years when you are vegan compared to an omnivore. Other interesting studies are vegetarian vegan diets and multiple health outcomes, a systematic review with meta-analysis of observational studies. And the study cardiovascular disease, mortality and cancer incidence in vegetarians, a meta-analysis and systematic review. So these are studies published in 2016 and 2012. Meta-analysis again, and those studies point in the direction that eating more plant-based food is clearly healthy. So here we have meta-analysis evidence that decreasing your meat consumption, increasing your fruit and vegetable consumption is healthy. On the other hand, we have systematic reviews where we are not able to conclude that increasing your organic food consumption is healthy. So that means if you care about health or the environment or the animals, what you can also do is buy non-organic food. You save a lot of money. This money that you save, you can donate it to organizations that promote plant-based food. So you can look up vegan organizations, animal advocacy organizations that promote plant-based food, and promoting plant-based food is a very big win for the environment, multiple benefits, and also multiple benefits for human health. So for human health we can speak of decreased risk of chronic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes type 2. So there's clear evidence, or strong evidence, that eating more plant-based is better for these health risks, the chronic disease. Also, when it comes to infectious diseases, so again, if organic farming is against GMOs because there is this risk of spreading diseases, spreading the GMO genes to the environment, and well, this risk is not clearly a risk. There's no proven evidence yet that this is a risk. But on the other hand, so the worry is that there is an uncontrolled contamination kind of thing, something that's contaminating other things and it's beyond our control. Now that's what's happening in livestock farming. There is an uncontrolled contamination with antibiotic resistant bacteria and with dangerous zoonotic viruses, so viruses that transmit diseases from animals to humans. And what happens with those viruses and bacteria, it's clearly an example of an uncontrolled contamination. So there's also a public health risk when we consume animal products. Antibiotic resistance bacteria due to agriculture, livestock farming. There were estimates that it causes 1 in 20,000 deaths, 1 in 20,000 people a year will die from antibiotic resistant bacteria due to an over-application of antibiotics in livestock farming. So livestock farming is clearly producing dangerous, contaminating things that can spread without control. So here again, the clear message is, the elephant in the room is the animal products. We should decrease our consumption of animal products. And there is no clear evidence that organic farming is better or worse than non-organic farming. That's where I want to conclude this long video. I hope you enjoyed it.